South Africa is set to soon start rolling out the Sinovac-CoronaVac vaccine, which is manufactured in China after it recently received conditional approval from the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. The Chinese-made vaccine is being used in many countries, and it has been shown to be effective in preventing severe COVID-19 disease and death. But there are still some questions about its general efficacy, and it is not yet clear when the country will receive its consignment. So to discuss this, we are joined by Anton Arendse, who is the COO of South African-based company Numolux, which is the company tasked with bringing this vaccine into the country. Anton, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us, and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, Leanne. Good to be on the show.
In your statement, you said that China has now offered South Africa 10 million doses of the Sinovac vaccine. When are we getting them? How far is the process gone now?
Leanne, of course, there are many parties involved in a transaction such as this. From our side, since the authorization given by SAHPRA, we've moved very quickly to get the logistics in place. I can confirm that from Beijing, the first indication is of 1.2 million, which is available immediately. On the ground in South Africa, we've already engaged with the National Control Laboratory in Bloemfontein. They are the institution who need to do all of the batch testing for all samples that come into the country. So from our side, we are ready. I can also say that there have been approaches made by the Department of Health, by quite a few deputy directors general. And we are looking to very soon engage around formal negotiations, tying down logistics. And so we're confident that we're able to get a purchase order out soon.
All right, so just remind us, when I mentioned in the introduction, we had SAHPRA giving approval, but with conditions. Let's talk about those conditions again.
Look, the conditions are, they're quite a few. It needs to be said, but it's not peculiar to Sinovac. I think it's important just to give some context. Ordinarily, when medicines and vaccines are approved, it takes a better part of 4 to 5 years to get such approval done. Quite obviously, given the global pandemic we find ourselves in, we do not have the luxury of time. And so that decision made by not only the WHO, but a number of regulators, including SAHPRA, was to expedite the approvals process. So effectively, the minimum amount of trials that have been undertaken have now been done. While the rollout continues, there is a battery of trials and tests that need to be concluded in order for a vaccine, and this includes Sinovac, includes in fact all of the vaccines that have been approved by SAHPRA. The battery of tests and trials need to be concluded. So that's one of the conditions. And some of the others is that we need to, if there are any breakthrough infections or any anomalies, we are needing to report that to SAHPRA immediately.
So this is, so in other words, there's still going to be a lag of time between receiving these vaccines and actually administering them. So we're still a while away from this.
Leanne, an awkward question, because really we wouldn't want to get into the politics of it. But I think we've seen and the significance of getting Sinovac, Sinopharm, and some of the other vaccines approved in South Africa is significant. And very simply, we've heard the Director General of the World Health Organization berate since a year ago the phenomenon of stockpiling and of hoarding of vaccines by developed countries. And that happens at the expense of a number of developing countries. So it is very significant that companies like Sinovac and Sinopharm now have their vaccines being approved, because it allows developing countries, many of which in Latin America, Africa, and the Asian Pacific region, to also now initiate and give traction to their respective vaccine rollout programs. South Africa, we find ourselves in an awkward position, because there have been many commitments made in respect of vaccines coming to South Africa, but and much has already been said about the disjunct between the commitments made and the actual vaccines on the ground. Yeah. We now find ourselves in the very fortunate position that we have, and I believe the department calls it Plan B. We now have Sinovac, which has been approved by the regulator, and we know very clearly what the mandate of the regulator is. They've given authorization. South Africa now finds itself in a situation, a fortunate one, where we are able to make Sinovac-CoronaVac vaccine available, and thereby giving impetus and traction to our rollout program in South Africa.
Which is good news. However, when you read up a little bit about it, and there have been a lot of reports coming out now, let's focus on what's happening in Asia. And I'm going to bring Indonesia and Thailand into the conversation now, because I know that they have primarily been using Sinovac. Thailand have now done a bit of an about turn, and they're saying that they are now needing a booster shot, and they're going to be administering AstraZeneca to those that have already had Sinovac, because they find it's not effective enough. The same for Indonesia, which now is actually the epicenter of this COVID pandemic right now, with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people now getting infected, and it's quite a dire situation. They're going to use the Moderna, and they used it on healthcare workers, and the efficacy on healthcare workers was not seen as good enough. Help us understand this now. Now, we're bringing a vaccine that in Asia, they are now disputing that its efficacy is good enough.
Leanne, I think it's important that one understands the context. When one talks about the examples that you've just listed, we're talking about very, very recent ones, where there have now been new strains that have been that have entered the country. The science behind specifically Indonesia is that they've run the tests, and you may be aware that within the scientific community there has been mention made of using different vaccines in order to increase the efficacy of the vaccine. So the stopping of Sinovac in no way reflects on the efficacy of the vaccine itself. It is about using an additional vaccine in order to increase the efficacy and boost the immunity against all of the new variants. I think it also needs to be said here that, and much has already been said and written about the efficacy of the vaccine, of Sinovac. It's been used in more than 40 countries. More than 1 billion doses have been dispatched globally. The World Health Organization's view has been very consistent, and their view on this one really is, regardless of any variants, of any new mutations, countries need to proceed with the vaccine program, primarily because it mitigates against death, it mitigates against severe disease, it mitigates against hospitalization. And within the South African context specifically, you and I know that our health infrastructure is completely overstretched. In your news article, you'd indicated that just under 600 people have died. We've received reports that people are dying while sitting in chairs in hospitals because their beds are completely oversubscribed. The bottom line, and this is the World Health Organization's line, is we need to get people vaccinated.
And that's, I mean, you speak truth, because there is, I mean, these reports are true, and people are dying in large numbers on a daily basis, and this is something we do need to prevent. However, I mean, it's sometimes it's difficult to understand why we would put effort into putting a vaccine out in the market that against this new strain, this Delta variant, which is now the dominant variant here in South Africa. And, you know, some reports, I'm reading a report from that's written here on the BBC that's basically showing that every single 40 days, this is just having the Sinovac vaccine, it basically says that 40 days after having the vaccine, it diminishes. Antibodies in those fully vaccinated with Sinovac decline by half every 40 days. So one wonders why go through the effort of actually administering a vaccine that we know the efficacy is nowhere near strong enough against this, and then having to go for another vaccine, which we don't even have another vaccine to give.
Leanne, there is contradicting views within the scientific community. The bottom line on this issue is that there have been a battery of tests done by Sinovac. Those submissions have been made to the World Health Organization. Similar submissions have been made to our regulator.
Okay.
And on the back of those submissions and tests made, the regulators, both nationally and globally, have indicated that we do need to vaccinate. Let me put it to you differently. There is no silver bullet. And this not only relates to Sinovac, it relates to every single vaccine that is currently used globally. We cannot prevent infection. We cannot prevent severe disease. We cannot prevent death. In what we have right now are the tools at our disposal that will mitigate against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. Currently in South Africa, we have very little.
Yeah.
The demand for vaccines completely outstrips supply.
Yeah.
We have a vaccine rollout program where people are asked to register for vaccines, but nobody's asking the question whether these vaccines are actually in country and whether they exist. In the absence thereof, there is a very, very clear view that we need to make use of whatever tools we have at our disposal. In the context of South Africa, I believe there was a commitment made in excess of 40 million vaccines. We've seen just over or just under 6 million, 5.5 million, I forget what the count is. We are falling way behind. We have an economy that is battered. We have a health system that's overstretched. We need to remedy the situation now. And we cannot wait for the silver bullet to arrive, because it's going to take a fair amount of time. Thanks.
Well, Anton, we leave it there. Thanks very, very much for joining us. We wait and see the developments on Sinovac, and also wishing you well and to your family as well as we navigate through these very trying times in COVID pandemic times. So that was, of course, Anton Arendse, who's the COO of South African-based company Numolux, which is the company tasked with bringing Sinovac into the country and being made available to South Africans. All right, 25 minutes past 7. Let's get you some sports.